At the edge of a small, sleepy village stood an abandoned well, forgotten by time, but feared by everyone. The well was surrounded by overgrown grass and twisted, leafless trees that swayed even when the air was still. Villagers whispered that a jinn lived within its depths, a creature that lured the curious into darkness and never let them return. Its legend grew darker with each passing year, with tales of people disappearing after daring to approach. One moonless night, Adil, a brave yet curious young man, decided to test the stories. He convinced his friends to join him, promising an adventure that would prove the tales were nothing but superstition. They approached the well cautiously, the damp air pressing cold against their skin. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off the trees as though unseen eyes watched them. The well loomed ahead, black and deep, its water eerily still. As Adil leaned over the edge to peer into the darkness, a faint voice whispered from the depths, "Adil, come down." His heart raced, but he convinced himself it was the wind or one of his friends playing a prank. Suddenly, the water began to ripple on its own, sending chills down his spine. A gust of cold air rose from the well, and the shadows along its walls twisted unnaturally, as if alive. Adil's reflection appeared in the water, smiling. Though he was frozen with fear, his own eyes wide with terror. A long, black hand shot out from the water, clinging to the well's edge. The voice came again, low and menacing. "You have been called back." Adil stumbled backward, his friends screaming, as the darkness seemed to reach out for him, hinting at the horrors that awaited those who dared to challenge the well's curse. After the terrifying encounter at the edge of the well, Adil's friends tried to pull him away, but something invisible seemed to hold him in place. The air grew thicker, colder, and heavier, making it hard to breathe. Even the moon, if it had been there before, seemed to vanish behind a curtain of dark clouds. Every sound, the crunch of dead leaves underfoot, the distant howl of a dog, felt amplified, echoing unnaturally across the open field. Adil's mind raced, torn between fear and disbelief. The voice from the well had called him by name, and the water had moved as if alive, yet his friends insisted he was imagining it. Summoning the courage, he took a cautious step closer to the edge again, compelled by an unseen force that tugged at his thoughts. The shadows around the well stretched and twisted, forming shapes that looked like figures, watching silently. Suddenly, a gust of wind spiraled from the well, extinguishing the lantern one of his friends had brought. Darkness swallowed them entirely, leaving only the sound of their panicked breaths. From the depths, the whisper returned, stronger now, almost a hiss. "You cannot leave. You belong here." Adil froze, the terror in his chest pressing down like a heavy weight. A ripple appeared on the water, and for a moment, he thought he saw a second reflection, separate from his own, staring back with hollow eyes. His friends screamed as they tried to drag him away, but he felt an invisible grip around his ankles, pulling him subtly toward the well. The night seemed endless, time distorted, and the world outside the well faded, leaving only the oppressive presence of whatever dwelled below. By the time they managed to flee, Adil's mind was already haunted. Every sound, every shadow, even the faintest whisper of wind reminded him of the well and the creature within. That night, he realized some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The following night, sleep brought no relief for Adil. His mind replayed every detail of the encounter at the well, the whispering voice, the black hand, and the unnerving movement of his own reflection. Shadows in his room seemed to stretch and curl, taking shapes that weren't there before. Every small noise, the creak of a floorboard or the rustle of leaves outside, sent shivers down his spine. He could feel the presence of something watching him, patient and persistent. Compelled by an almost irresistible force, Adil returned to the well alone, despite the warnings of his friends. The night was darker than before. The clouds hung low, blocking even the faintest hint of moonlight. The well loomed like a gaping maw, its water reflecting the void above. As he approached, a chill ran through his body, and the air seemed thick with whispers, almost forming words he could not fully comprehend. Peering into the black water, Adil saw movement, ripples forming without wind or disturbance. His reflection appeared, but twisted, eyes glowing with a supernatural light. A voice slithered from the depths. "You belong to me, forever." His heart pounded, yet some part of him felt drawn toward the water, as if invisible threads tugged at his limbs and mind. Suddenly, the surface erupted, a black hand shooting upward, claws glinting in the faint starlight, reaching for him. Adil stumbled backward, tripping over roots and rocks, his breath ragged. The shadows around the well now seemed alive, writhing and stretching, forming figures that whispered his name. Panic surged, yet leaving was impossible. Every step forward towards safety felt slower, weighted, like the night itself resisted him. By the time he finally staggered home, the image of the hand, the whispering voice, and the unnatural reflection had seared into his memory. Adil realized, with growing horror, that the well did not just haunt a place. It haunted his mind. The jinn's presence had embedded itself in his consciousness, leaving no escape, and the darkness waited patiently for him to return. The night after his terrifying return from the well, Adil could barely sleep. Every shadow in his room seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The faintest sounds, the creak of the old wooden floor, the rustling of trees outside, even his own heartbeat, felt amplified, echoing like the whispers from the well. He tried to convince himself it was fear playing tricks on his mind, but deep down, he knew something had followed him home. As darkness settled outside, Adil noticed small, strange signs. Drops of water appearing on the floor near his bed, mud smeared along the edges of the room, and faint whispers that seemed to come from the corners of the walls. The air grew colder, and he could feel an invisible weight pressing on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Every time he turned toward a shadow, it seemed to flicker, vanish, and then reappear closer than before. Unable to resist the pull, Adil found himself wandering outside, drawn toward the well once more. The path seemed longer than before, and the wind carried faint, eerie whispers that sounded like distant voices calling his name. The well appeared before him like a black void, its surface unnaturally still, yet he could sense movement beneath, something alive and waiting. He stepped closer, feeling invisible fingers brushing his skin, tugging him toward the opening. His own reflection shimmered in the water, warped and sinister, eyes glowing with a red, unnatural light. The whispers grew louder, forming words that cut into his mind. "You cannot escape. You belong here." Panic surged, but his legs felt rooted, as though the ground itself resisted his escape. Adil stumbled back and fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The shadows around the well seemed to coil like snakes, creeping toward him, merging with the darkness. Even at a distance, he could feel the presence of the jinn watching, waiting, patient. That night, he realized the terror was no longer confined to the well. It had become part of him, infecting his mind, and he knew he could not outrun what had claimed him. Adil's nights grew darker and more restless. Sleep offered no escape. Every shadow, every sound seemed to stretch into horrors he could not name. Even the familiar shapes of his room transformed at night. Walls creaked with whispers, windows flickered as if someone stood outside watching. The terror was no longer limited to the well. It had entered his mind, infecting every thought with a creeping dread. One night, drawn by a compulsion he could neither fight nor understand, Adil found himself walking again toward the well. The path was shrouded in mist, twisting and uneven, as though the earth itself had conspired to make him arrive there. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker, carrying a faint, unnatural hum. Shadows danced along the ground, stretching into grotesque shapes that seemed almost human, almost alive, whispering his name and laughing softly. Reaching the well, the water appeared blacker than ever, absorbing the moonlight. Ripples formed on the surface despite the lack of wind. Adil's own reflection appeared, but it was distorted, smiling cruelly, eyes glowing red and filled with malevolence. Then the water erupted, and a long, black hand shot out, dripping with inky darkness. It lingered in the air, reaching for him, beckoning him closer with silent authority. Adil stumbled backward, falling into the wet, muddy ground, heart hammering in his chest. The shadows around the well coiled and shifted like living things, extending fingers of darkness toward him. Even as he ran, a sense of being watched, pursued, and hunted pressed down upon him. The well's jinn had marked him. It had entered his mind, twisting fear into obsession. By the time he returned home, breathless and trembling, Adil knew the truth. The jinn's influence did not end at the well. It had attached itself to him, following, waiting, patient. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow could be the call of the well again, reminding him that some horrors are permanent, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The days that followed were a blur for Adil. Light no longer felt comforting. The sun seemed dimmer, and shadows clung to him even in the brightest rooms. Every sound carried an unnatural resonance, as though the jinn from the well had followed him into the world of the living. The simplest noises, footsteps outside, a dripping faucet, a whisper of wind, triggered panic in his chest, reminding him of the cold grip of the black hand that had reached for him. Unable to shake the pull, Adil began to see glimpses of the well everywhere. In the reflection of a puddle on the street, in the darkened water of a bucket, even in the polished surface of a metal plate, he saw distorted images, his own face, smiling cruelly with glowing red eyes. Each vision was accompanied by a faint whisper, almost imperceptible at first. Come back. You belong to me. One evening, curiosity mixed with terror, he found himself standing again before the well. Mist rose from the ground, curling around his legs, cold and clammy. The air was thick with whispers, and the shadows along the trees and grass moved of their own accord, forming shapes that watched and beckoned him. The water below rippled violently, and the black hand emerged once more, fingers clawing at the air, dripping in darkness that seemed to crawl along the ground toward him. Adil felt invisible threads tugging at him, pulling his mind and body toward the depths. Panic surged, and he stumbled backward, landing in mud that seemed to cling to him, pulling him down further. The shadows writhed and stretched, merging with the night, wrapping around him like a living thing. By the time he finally escaped back to the village, Adil was not the same. The jinn had marked him permanently, embedding itself in his mind. Every quiet night, every shadow, every whisper reminded him of the well's presence. He understood with a sinking dread. Some horrors are not just in a place. They follow you, live inside you, and wait patiently for the moment you falter. Adil's mind was unraveling. Even in the safety of his home, he could feel the invisible weight of the well pressing down on him. Shadows moved independently, crawling across the walls and floor like living creatures. Every time he closed his eyes, the black water of the well appeared, and the whispering voice echoed in his ears. You cannot leave. You belong here. The jinn's presence had embedded itself in his thoughts, making sleep a torment rather than a relief. Desperate to escape the mental torture, Adil tried to focus on normal life, school, friends, chores, but everything reminded him of the well. A puddle on the street reflected not just his own face, but the distorted, glowing-eyed version that seemed to mock him. The wind carried whispers that only he could hear, dragging him back to that night at the well. Each sound, each shadow, every flicker of light became a threat, a reminder that the jinn was patient and relentless. Unable to resist any longer, Adil found himself walking alone toward the well once again. The path felt endless, shrouded in thick mist that seemed to consume the village around him. Every step made the whispers grow louder, almost forming words he could not fully understand, yet they tugged at his mind, luring him closer. The well rose before him like a black void, its surface eerily still yet alive with a sinister pulse. He leaned over the edge, and the water erupted violently. The black hand shot up once more, dripping in inky darkness, stretching toward him with unnatural speed. His reflection twisted and grinned, eyes burning red. The shadows around the well coiled and lunged like living snakes, pressing in from all sides. Adil stumbled backward, falling into the cold, wet mud, heart hammering with pure terror. As he finally scrambled to safety, he realized the truth. The jinn was no longer just in the well, it was inside him. Every thought, every fear, every shadow in his mind carried the presence of the creature. There was no escape, only the patient, relentless waiting of the darkness that had claimed him. Adil's nights became unbearable. Darkness was no longer just the absence of light. It was alive, pressing against him, crawling along the walls and floor. Every shadow seemed to have intent. Every sound carried a sinister echo. Even familiar objects, his bed, the floorboards, the cracked windows, appeared twisted and threatening, as if the well's jinn had seeped into his world. Sleep was impossible. Even the quietest moments were filled with whispers calling his name, urging him back to the black water. One evening, drawn by a force he could not resist, Adil found himself walking toward the well again. The village around him seemed distorted, streets longer, trees warped, fog thickening with every step. The air itself seemed heavier, carrying whispers that slithered into his mind, almost intelligible, promising him that resistance was futile. "You belong to me. Come back." Panic churned inside him, yet he could not stop. When he reached the well, it appeared darker than ever, absorbing the faint glow of the stars above. The surface rippled, alive, though no wind stirred the air. Adil's reflection stared back at him, grinning cruelly, eyes glowing red, beckoning him to come closer. Then, the black hand shot out once more, rising slowly, dripping with darkness, curling like a living thing toward him. Adil stumbled backward, mud clinging to his clothes, the shadows twisting and writhing around him. The whispers intensified, merging with the hiss of the wind, forming words he could feel more than hear. "You are mine." Every instinct screamed to run, but the pull of the well's darkness tugged relentlessly at his mind, at his very soul. Even after escaping, the village no longer felt safe. Every shadow, every movement in the corner of his eyes, every distant whisper reminded him that the jinn was no longer confined to the well. It was inside him, patient and eternal, and it would wait for the exact moment to reclaim what it had begun to possess. Adil's mind had become a battlefield. Every waking moment was haunted by the memory of the well, the black hand, and the glowing red eyes of his twisted reflection. Even in broad daylight, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, creeping along walls and floors, reminding him that the jinn's presence was no longer confined to the well. The whispers had become constant companions, sliding into his thoughts, repeating the same chilling phrase, "You belong to me." One night, unable to resist the compulsion any longer, Adil felt himself pulled toward the well once again. The village seemed alien, streets twisted and fog clung to the ground, wrapping around his legs like icy fingers. Every step toward the well made his heartbeat pound louder, every shadow along the path seeming alive, watching, beckoning him forward. He knew what awaited him, yet some invisible force compelled him onward, as if the jinn's grip on his mind had grown stronger. When he reached the well, the black water shimmered unnaturally under the faint starlight. Ripples moved across its surface, though the air was still. Adil's reflection appeared again, twisted and smiling cruelly, eyes glowing with fiery red. A black hand emerged slowly, dripping with darkness, stretching toward him with a patience that felt eternal. Shadows from the surrounding trees and grass began to coil and writhe, forming almost human shapes, whispering his name in voices that sounded like they came from deep within the earth. Adil tried to turn and flee, but the ground seemed to resist him. Every step was sluggish, as though the well itself had reached out to hold him. Panic surged through his body, but a horrifying realization settled in his mind. The jinn did not just exist in the well, it had merged with his very being. Every shadow, every whisper, every movement in the darkness reminded him that the creature was patient, relentless, and unstoppable. Escape was no longer an option. The jinn had claimed him completely. By now, Adil's life had become consumed by the presence of the well's jinn. Every shadow in his home, every whisper in the wind, even the faintest flicker of light seemed alive with the creature's intent. He could no longer distinguish between reality and the illusions the jinn had planted in his mind. Sleep had become a battleground, where the black hand reached for him from endless darkness, and his reflection mocked him relentlessly. Compelled by fear and curiosity, Adil found himself once again at the edge of the well. The mist hung thick, curling around his legs like cold, living tendrils. The air was heavy with the jinn's whispers, now clearer than ever. "You belong to me, forever." Shadows along the trees and grass twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that were neither human nor animal, watching his every movement with patient malice. The water in the well began to ripple violently, though no wind or disturbance touched it. Adil's reflection appeared, grinning cruelly, eyes glowing red with unnatural light. The black hand emerged once more, slow and deliberate, dripping darkness that seemed to crawl along the ground toward him. Adil tried to retreat, but the earth itself seemed to resist him, slowing his escape, pulling him closer to the well. Falling to his knees in mud and cold, he realized the horrifying truth. The jinn was no longer confined to the well. It had merged with his very soul. Every thought, every heartbeat, every fear belonged to the creature now. Even when he returned home, he could feel its presence in every shadow, in every whisper, in every reflection that stared back at him. The terror was permanent, unyielding, and eternal. Adil understood that some horrors are not merely in a place. They inhabit your mind, your body, and your soul. The well waits silently, patient, for the next time its darkness will claim another victim. And he knew, with crushing certainty, that he would never be free again. The jinn had won, and there was no escape.